Your Honor, she hasn't contributed to this house in years. I'm asking the court to remove her from the deed. I felt every eye in the courtroom turn toward me. My husband wouldn't even look at me. His lawyer shuffled papers like this was routine, like I was a billing error being corrected. Then the judge said, "Let's review page 7, and everything shifted. My name is Danielle Brooks, and I'm 38 years old. I've been married for 20 years. For most of those years, I worked part-time as a dental assistant while raising 2 kids, managing a household, and quietly holding together a life that looked effortless from the outside because I made it look that way. I wasn't the breadwinner. I wasn't the loud one in the room. I was the one filling out school permission forms at midnight, sitting on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m. with a feverish 6-year-old, and cooking every holiday dinner in that house for 2 decades straight. That house wasn't just property to me. It was scraped knees on hardwood floors and birthday candles melting into frosting. It was my mother's last Thanksgiving before cancer took her, sitting in the chair by the window because she was too weak to stand. I carried her plate to her that night. She held my hand and said the house felt warm. She meant it as a compliment to me, not the walls. Me, my husband, Eric, built a small contracting business over the years. I supported him through every shaky season of it. I did the bookkeeping at night after the kids were asleep. I answered client emails when he was on job sites. I kept the accounts organized during the stretches when we weren't sure we'd make payroll. There were months I stretched grocery money so he could reinvest in equipment. I never complained. I believed in what we were building together. But somewhere along the way, he started acting like it was all his. When the business grew, so did his ego. The clients got bigger. The truck got newer. And I got quieter, which he mistook for irrelevance. I wasn't rich or glamorous. I didn't have a title or a corner office. But I had something he never thought to account for. And when he tried to erase me from the deed to our 20-year home, he had absolutely no idea what I'd already prepared for. If you've ever supported someone's dream only to be treated like you didn't matter, hit that subscribe button right now. Have you ever been told your work didn't count because it wasn't flashy or visible or loud enough? Share your story in the comments. Click hype or like if you believe quiet strength still matters. Let's get into it. It started on a Tuesday night. Eric came home later than usual, sat down at the kitchen table, and said it the way you'd mention a dentist appointment. Casual. Almost bored. I talked to a lawyer today. It's just paperwork. Nothing personal. I set down my fork. What paperwork? He shrugged without looking up. The house should legally reflect who paid for it. I sat very still. My name had been on that deed since the beginning. Since we were 18 and 19 years old, signing papers with shaking hands and big dreams. I thought maybe I'd misunderstood him. I told myself I had. I went to bed that night with a tight feeling in my chest that I couldn't name. Weeks later, I was served official court documents at the front door. Eric had filed a legal petition to remove me from the deed, claiming I had abandoned financial responsibility for the property. I read the language 3 times. Each time it felt colder. Each time the words rearranged themselves into something uglier. In court, he stood straight and spoke with the kind of confidence that comes from believing no one will push back. She hasn't contributed to mortgage payments in over a decade, he said. I started to respond. His lawyer stepped in immediately, presenting bank statements. Carefully selected ones. Ones that showed his deposits and nothing of mine. He framed me as dependent, irresponsible, emotionally unstable, a woman who had chosen comfort over contribution. The humiliation peaked when Eric said, she stayed home by choice. That was her decision. He said it like it was generous of him to have allowed it. I could see neighbors from our church sitting in the gallery behind him. Some of them looked at their hands. None of them looked at me. Then the judge slowed down. He was flipping through the documents quietly. He stopped. His brows pulled together slightly. He looked up. Mr. Brooks, the judge said slowly, can you explain this clause? The first betrayal outside that courtroom came while the case was still pending. I came home one afternoon to find the locks had been changed. Eric stood inside and told me through the window that his lawyer had advised him to protect the asset. He said it without apology, without hesitation. "You can stay with your sister," he said coldly. I stood on my own porch, outside a house where my mother had eaten her last Thanksgiving dinner, and I had nowhere to go but my sister's guest bedroom. I took one bag. I didn't cry until I was in the car. The second betrayal came through my phone. He told our adult children that I was trying to take half of what he built. He framed it as greed, selfishness. My daughter texted me that same evening. "Mom, is this true?" 3 words. I stared at them for a long time before I answered. That hurt worse than the court papers. The third betrayal I almost missed. He transferred business funds into a separate account and then claimed financial hardship in front of the judge. I overheard him on a phone call one evening when he didn't know I was nearby. He laughed quietly into the phone and said, "She won't see a dime." I started gathering everything I could find. Old emails, tax returns, mortgage documents going back years. I sat at my sister's kitchen table every night with files spread out around me and coffee going cold beside me. I started remembering things I hadn't thought about in years. Late nights entering payroll data when his company nearly collapsed under a failed contract. The email threads where I negotiated with suppliers on his behalf. The spreadsheets I built from scratch. Each insult landed, and each one hurt. But something inside me was hardening. Not bitterness exactly. More like clarity. I stopped pleading. I started planning. What Eric didn't know was that I had never stopped keeping records. 10 years ago, I started noticing small inconsistencies in his accounting. Nothing dramatic at first. Just numbers that didn't quite match up. I didn't confront him. I simply began saving copies. Quietly. Consistently. I had digital backups of joint investments. I had documentation of my bookkeeping contributions. I had original contract drafts from the early years of his business. Things he had long since forgotten existed. But the most important piece wasn't any of that. It was a refinancing agreement we had signed in 2014. Page 7 of that agreement contained a clause that Eric had clearly never read carefully enough to remember. It stated that ownership of the property was irrevocably joint, regardless of income contribution. Both signatures were there. Both witnesses. It had been notarized. And the original copy had been sitting in a fireproof lockbox at my sister's house for over 8 years, because I had put it there back when something told me I should. I didn't mention it to anyone. I let Eric continue building his case. I let him believe I was unprepared. I let him schedule his celebration dinner with colleagues. I had a plan he never saw coming. I reached out to Mrs. Harper. She had handled our very first home closing 20 years ago, back when Eric and I were just a young couple who could barely afford the filing fees. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but she answered on the second ring. When I explained what was happening, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Come in tomorrow morning. Bring everything." She recognized me the moment I walked into her office. "You were the one who asked all the smart questions," she said with a small smile. She sat across from me and reviewed every document I had brought. She read slowly and carefully. When she got to the refinancing agreement, she stopped. She read page 7 twice. Then she set it down and looked at me directly. "Danielle, he signed something he can't undo." She agreed to represent me without hesitation. She filed for full disclosure of Eric's business records. Meanwhile, Eric seemed to grow more confident with every passing day. He told mutual friends it was basically done. He moved forward with plans for the house as if I no longer existed. He was so certain of his outcome that he stopped paying attention to mine. Mrs. Harper told me the night before the hearing, "Let him talk. Truth doesn't rush." The air in the courtroom smelled like old paper and recirculated air conditioning. I sat straight. I kept my hands still in my lap. Eric began. He was composed and rehearsed. "She hasn't paid toward this property in years," he said. "The financial record speaks for itself." Mrs. Harper stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't perform. She simply said, "Your Honor, may we direct the court's attention to page 7 of the 2014 refinancing agreement?" The judge took the document. He read the clause aloud. "Full joint ownership. Immune to unilateral removal. Binding under all circumstances regardless of individual financial contribution." The words filled the room and then settled into silence. That silence was loud. It pressed against the walls. Nobody moved. Mrs. Harper wasn't finished. She presented documented evidence of my bookkeeping contributions over the years, including tax filings that listed my labor as a business service with assigned value. She then laid out the transfers Eric had attempted to obscure in the weeks before the hearing. She presented them carefully, without drama, the way you present a fact that requires no decoration. The judge looked at Eric directly. You signed this agreement. You acknowledged joint equity. You were present at the notarization. Eric shifted. That was standard paperwork. I didn't think it was meant to apply in a situation like this. The judge cut him off cleanly. Standard or not, it is legally binding. Someone in the gallery gasped. I heard it clearly. I kept my eyes forward. Eric's petition was denied in full. The judge issued a formal warning regarding the attempted financial concealment, noting that further action could follow if the record was reviewed more closely. Eric's lawyer gathered his papers quickly and quietly. The confident posture was gone. For the first time in months, Eric looked at me across that courtroom. Really looked. And I did not look away. Not even a little. I held his gaze until he was the one who turned first. The legal outcome restored my full standing on the deed. I was exactly where I had always been, where my signature had always been. Eric's credibility took a visible hit, not just in court, but in the business community he had worked so hard to impress. Some of those colleagues at the celebration dinner he had already held quietly stopped returning his calls. I decided I was done with the marriage. That decision didn't come from anger. It came from a place of quiet and absolute certainty. I didn't want to fight over the house emotionally or drag the process out for months. I negotiated a fair buyout instead, a number that reflected my contribution, my years, my work, and then I moved into a smaller place. My choice. Not because I was pushed out, not because I lost, because I was ready to stop living inside a life that had stopped being mine. The first morning in my own space, I made coffee and stood at the window and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Steady. Like the ground under me was actually solid. He tried to erase my name from a document I helped create, in a house I helped build, during a life I showed up for every single day. Instead, he reminded me exactly who I am. If someone ever tried to rewrite history and pretend your contributions didn't happen, you already know how deeply that cuts. Have you been dismissed because your work lived behind the scenes, invisible to everyone who didn't bother to look? Share your story in the comments. You deserve to be seen, and your effort counts more than people want to admit. Subscribe to stand with others who've been underestimated and came out the other side anyway. Did this story hit home? Let me know by liking the video and dropping your thoughts in the comments below. Click hype to help this story reach someone who needs to hear it today. Your support makes a real difference. Thank you for being here.